I want to take a little moment to address the insecurity that people often feel when they start using something like auto control. Now, look, I completely understand where you're coming from. You're missing material, you're skipping paragraphs, you're going out of order, it feels chaotic. You're like, what if I miss something important? What if, I ask a question that's not going to be relevant? You've got all these questions, okay? I just want to sit down and really address why auto control is really the only option that you have that makes any sense. So there's this thing called a Swiss cheese model, and you may have heard about this before. It's not my own thing. It's quite a well-known kind of model that's being used. And the idea is that Swiss cheese has all these holes in it, right? And it's got holes in sort of random different places. And the idea is that in a Swiss cheese model, you have multiple layers that are stacked together. So if one thing were to pass through the first layer, it will be stopped on the second. And then if something were to pass through and it were to still pass, it will be stopped. So the idea is that you're not making every single individual layer completely seamless without any holes in it. You're basically saying, look, I'm aware that each layer has holes in it, but the idea is that stacking multiple of them together means that nothing will get through at the end. So one of the common fears and insecurities that students will have is that you worry that you're going to miss something. But the system is set up that I'm going to teach you is set up in a way that, first of all, don't worry because the system itself is set up so that you're not going to miss anything. As in, if you were to follow the system, it should be impossible to miss anything anyway. But even without that system, the chances of you missing something are really low because of the fact that when you learn something through auto control, you end up revisiting the same information multiple times. So if you've got something on page, whatever, page number 1, and then you ask a question, and that question takes you to page 3, what happens over enough series of questioning, you get taken to page 4, then to page 5, and then you ask another question that gets taken to page 6. Because you're constantly thinking about how to relate it together, and your questions are always saying, okay, well, how does 6 relate to number 1? You actually then end up going back to number 1, and then back to number 3, and then back to number 4. So you're constantly actually going back and forth between all the material in order to build that nice, well-connected web of information where everything is related to each other. So even if you miss something the first time, you're probably going to come back to that 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 times with a different angle each time. So you're really not going to miss anything. And that's how the Swiss cheese model here works, is that even if you missed something on your first run through, by the time you do your second and third time, you're really unlikely to actually miss anything meaningful. The other thing that we can look at is just the pure fact that the alternative is much worse, because when you go through things from beginning to end very linearly, and you're simply following this structure, when we say we're going to miss something, what are we actually referring to? Are we talking about the fact that we didn't write a copy of that in our notes exactly the same way? Are we talking about the fact that our eyes did not glance across the page in the exact order? Because really what we should be thinking about is, what if I miss something not entering into my actual brain where the learning happens? What if I read something and there's no retention? So these are the things that we should be worrying about. And because auto control makes it so that we're learning based on what we're curious about, we're already increasing the retention. So it, by nature, should mean that we're missing less, whereas you're actually more at risk of missing things if you were to simply trick yourself into thinking you're learning just because your eyes read it and you wrote some notes. But we all know that that's an illusion. We're just tricking ourselves there. It's not really true. So the alternative is that we are using an order of learning that we already know is inherently wrong. So we already know that there's no possible way that the order in which we were first given the information was suited optimally for our brain. Well, there's a statistically tiny, tiny, tiny little chance that that's the case, but basically we can say that that's not going to be true. So we already know the order is wrong. So we're basically saying, do I learn it in the order that I know is wrong, Or do I at least give myself the opportunity to learn it in the order that's probably a little bit at least more right? So when you think about that, the alternative is much more bleak. And even then, even if we were to somehow miss something and there were to be something that just snuck through, we would actually spend a lot less time on learning this little bit that managed to slip through because we've saved so much time learning everything before it. If we learn 90% of the material with 90% retention the first time round because we exercise good order control and we cover what would have normally taken us 10 hours in 8 hours, which is a very reasonable time save, that's very realistic. Even if we were to miss 10% of the information, we now have all of the time that we would have spent in revision to just pick up that remaining 10%, as opposed to how we might normally do things where the first time we read through it, we only have 30% retention, and then we revise it to 50% retention, and then we revise it and we get to 60%, and we revise it till we get to 80%, and then we do our past paper questions to get to 90%, and then we do more past paper questions, times 100 to get to 100%, where we're finally happy if we ever even get there, assuming that we actually managed to cram all of that in. All of that time ends up getting saved because it's like, okay, we've got 80 to 90% retention here. Sure, we missed 10 to 20% of the detail, but that's fine because we can just fill that in here, 10 to 20% of the detail, boom, and we've saved all of this time that normally is spent on that learning and relearning. So again, it just comes back to the idea that all of the strategies we use, we really want to be gearing it towards having maximum retention as early on as possible, rather than just admitting and saying, okay, look, I'm gonna need to study it again and again and again. That's just the way my brain works, which by the way, it's not. And kind of trapping ourselves into that spiral. Because if you do that, you don't have any hope of change. But if you use this, then I'm confident that you will be able to start seeing some pretty dramatic results just because you're taking more control of your learning.